You keep Salah consistent, and you expect consistency to produce depth. That expectation feels reasonable. Repetition should strengthen meaning. Yet you notice the opposite can happen. The act remains, but the inner response weakens. You still complete the sequence, but you do not always receive what the sequence is meant to produce. Al-Ghazali is useful here because he treated this problem as intelligible. He did not reduce it to lack of spirituality, and he did not treat it as a random mood. He observed that the human inner life follows patterns. The mind automates, the heart negotiates, the self protects, and the act becomes a shell when its function is forgotten. So you begin by changing your question. You stop asking, "Why am I not feeling anything?" That question already assumes that the proof of reality must be a feeling. Instead you ask, what is Salah trying to train in me, and what is resisting that training? This shifts the entire investigation from chasing states to examining mechanisms. Dryness, in this view, is not the end of Salah. It is a sign about how you are approaching it. It tells you what part of you is absent while you remain outwardly present. And the question becomes sharper, almost unavoidable. If Salah is designed to awaken attention, why can the same act become something you complete while remaining inwardly absent? Al-Ghazali lived among people who respected precision. There were scholars who refined law, thinkers who refined argument, teachers who refined practice. In such an environment, it was possible to perfect the visible side of religion while the inner side remained untrained. You could become accurate in form and still remain unchanged in perception. Al-Ghazali noticed that this is not a rare exception. It is a common drift. Humans protect what can be measured. They improve what can be checked. They repeat what is socially validated. Meanwhile, the inner faculty, attention, sincerity, and orientation can remain weak because it is harder to audit. When you place your own dryness inside this context, you stop treating it as a personal anomaly. You see it as a predictable imbalance, correct performance without inner science. The question shifts again. It becomes less about whether you are doing Salah, and more about whether Salah is doing what it is designed to do to you. So you do not attack the form. You also do not romanticize inner feelings. You simply ask what the form is meant to produce, and what conditions are required for that production. If the form is correct, what exactly is missing when the inner effect does not appear? You begin to observe a basic mechanism. The mind automates what it repeats. Automation is not evil. It is efficient. But it becomes a problem when automation replaces presence. The body continues to perform, while awareness relocates elsewhere. Salah is especially vulnerable to this because it contains stable sequences, familiar words, familiar movements, familiar timing. The mind learns them. And once the mind learns them, it can run them with minimal attention. At that point, dryness is not mysterious. Dryness is what it feels like when an act that requires awareness is performed without awareness. Al-Ghazali's lens is precise here. He would not call you insincere simply because your attention wanders. He would call it untrained. There is a difference. Insincerity is a decision against truth. Untrained attention is a condition that requires discipline. So you watch yourself. You notice how quickly the mind moves away. You notice how it returns occasionally and then departs again. You notice that you can finish the act while barely remembering it. That is not an accusation. It is evidence of automation. And a more difficult question emerges, not for guilt, but for clarity. If your body performs Salah while your attention is elsewhere, who is the real agent of the act? Al-Ghazali's central move is to treat Salah as training, not only obligation. The obligation matters, but the hidden function matters as well. Salah is a structured discipline that trains what your mind does not train by default: sustained attention, clarified intention, and correct perception of what is ultimate. This reframes the entire problem. Dryness is no longer lack of feeling. Dryness becomes lack of reception. Like any training, the benefit depends on what the trainee actually does internally, not merely on completing the external routine. Al-Ghazali would say that Salah interrupts the ego's default orientation. The self lives in a continuous flow of priorities: urgency, approval, control, fear, desire. Salah is designed to reorder that flow repeatedly. Not once. Repeatedly. That repetition is not for boredom. It is for reconditioning. It teaches the inner faculty to return to a higher reference point again and again. You begin to see why dryness is diagnostic. If the act feels empty, it may be because you are treating it as a task to finish rather than a training to undergo. A task is completed by the body. A training is received by the inner faculty. If the inner faculty refuses training, dryness persists even when the task is completed. If Salah is training, why do you expect transformation while refusing to train the one who must receive it? Now the analysis becomes more specific. Intention is not a sentence you say to begin. It is the direction of the self during the act. You may state an intention, but your operative intention can be different. Al-Ghazali's approach makes this measurable. You do not measure intention by what you claim. You measure it by what your mind keeps trying to achieve while you pray. Are you trying to finish quickly? Are you trying to reduce guilt? Are you trying to preserve an identity of being a person who prays? Are you trying to calm anxiety? None of these are necessarily immoral. But they are different intentions from worship as surrender and reorientation. Dryness often appears when intentions are divided. The heart wants one thing. The mind wants another. The body performs the motions, but the inner direction is inconsistent. A divided intention produces a diluted act. And a diluted act produces a diluted effect. So you do not ask, "Did I intend?" You ask, "What did I actually prioritize during the act?" That question reveals the true direction. It may reveal motives you did not admit. That admission is the beginning of renewal, because intention cannot be corrected if it is not recognized. If intention shapes the act, what becomes of Salah when your stated intention and your actual intention disagree? Another cause of dryness is semantic decay. When words are repeated without active understanding, they become tokens. You pronounce them, but they no longer confront you. They become familiar sounds rather than living claims. Al-Ghazali emphasizes that speech without lived meaning becomes mere utterance. This does not require you to become emotional. It requires you to be mentally honest. Meaning is not preserved by repetition. Meaning is preserved by renewed comprehension. So you notice the difference between knowing a meaning and meeting a meaning. Knowing a meaning is informational. Meeting a meaning is when the content of the words challenges your current state. If you avoid that challenge, the words lose force. They become a sequence you pass through, not a truth you face. Re-understanding, then, is not adding excitement. It is renewing contact. It is letting the meanings function as they were meant to function, as statements that reorganize the self. Dryness often decreases not when you chase sensation, but when you restore comprehension, slowly, deliberately, honestly. This is why you can be fluent in translation and still feel dry. Translation is not the same as comprehension. Comprehension requires presence, and presence requires willingness to be addressed by what you say. If you repeat meanings daily, why do they stop meaning anything to you? Presence is often treated as something you either have or do not have. Al-Ghazali treats it more like a capacity that can be trained. If you treat presence as a mood, you will wait for it and blame yourself when it does not appear. If you treat presence as a skill, you will practice return. The mind will wander. That is not the crisis. The crisis is that you interpret wandering as proof that the act is worthless. Ghazali's logic suggests a different approach. Each noticing of wandering is a moment of training. Each deliberate return is part of the act's inner function. The value is not in a perfect, uninterrupted state. The value is in repeated reorientation. You begin to see why dryness persists. Dryness is often what remains when you keep performing without training the return. You want the end state without accepting the method that produces it. So you observe the practice of return in conceptual terms. You notice distraction. You do not dramatize it. You return. You notice again. You return again. Over time, the returning reforms the inner faculty. And as the faculty strengthens, the act's inner reception changes. But a question remains, because the ego resists training and prefers judgment. If presence is a skill, why do you judge yourself for lacking it instead of training it? The self has a subtle capacity. It can use good actions to protect itself from change. It can complete worship in a way that confirms identity rather than dissolves it. This is not always conscious. It is structural. Al-Ghazali frequently points toward this danger. The ego can treat Salah as proof of being good, proof of being safe, proof of being superior, proof of being done. When worship becomes proof, it loses its transformative edge. It no longer reaches the core, because the core is defended by the need to preserve an image. Dryness can result from this defense. Not because the act is empty, but because the self will not allow the act to penetrate. The self wants the benefits without surrender. It wants the form without the reordering. It wants the label without the exposure. So you audit yourself without hostility. During Salah, do you remain open to being corrected? Or do you remain primarily concerned with completion? Do you treat the act as an encounter that can change you, or as an achievement that belongs to you? This is where dryness becomes meaningful again. It can be a sign that the self is using worship as a shield. If worship is meant to humble the self, why does the self often feel strengthened by it? When you reach this point, the approach changes. You stop treating dryness as a verdict about your spirituality. You treat it as diagnostic information. Al-Ghazali's method is map-like. If dryness is present, which layer is missing right now? Is it intention? Is it comprehension? Is it return? Is it openness? Is it surrender of egoic proof? Each layer produces a different kind of dryness, and each layer requires a different correction. This transforms your inner dialogue. You stop saying, "I'm failing." You start saying, "I'm learning what is absent." The moment you shift into diagnosis, a subtle change occurs. Attention becomes investigative rather than resigned. You become present in a new way, not because you achieved a special state, but because you started to observe precisely. This is important. You do not force an experience. You clarify a structure. And clarity itself begins to dissolve dryness, because dryness thrives in unconscious repetition. Diagnosis interrupts unconsciousness. But there is still a deeper question, because even diagnosis can become another performance. If dryness is a message, why do you treat it as a final label instead of reading it? What is hidden in Salah is not a secret technique. It is a structure, repeated reorientation that reforms the one who prays. Al-Ghazali's insight is that the effect of Salah is not guaranteed by motion and recitation alone. It depends on whether the inner faculty is participating, intention as direction, meaning as comprehension, presence as return, humility as openness. Dryness is destroyed when you stop trying to manufacture a feeling and start removing distortion. Distortion includes divided intention, token speech, untrained attention, and egoic self-preservation. When distortion decreases, reception increases. And when reception increases, the act regains its function without needing to prove itself through sensation. So you end in a quieter understanding. Salah becomes less a performance you evaluate and more a discipline that evaluates you. Not through emotion, but through alignment. Not through excitement, but through repeated return. And the deepest change may not announce itself as an event. If the deepest change cannot be measured as a feeling, how will you recognize it without turning Salah into another performance?